Welcome to Passionate Reply, and welcome to Great Albums. It's time for me to finally do a video on one of my favorite bands of all time, and the very first band I obsessed over when I was a kid, the Pet Shop Boys. Their fourth LP, 1990s Behavior, is considered by many to be their best work, and it's also one of my personal favorites of theirs, so it seems like a great place to start. The preceding Pet Shop Boys LP, 1988, Introspective, was their deepest dive into densely arranged, nightclub-ready, post-disco compositions. Nowadays, people tend to praise it for its more experimental and baroque qualities, but it's also very much a party album, blending synth-pop with house and rave influences.
I don't know why, I don't know how. Thought I loved you, but I'm not sure now. Seen you look at strangers too many times. The love you want is of a different kind. Remember when we felt the sun? A love like paradise, how hot it burned. Threat of distant thunder, the sky was red. And when you walked, you always turn every head. Watch them all fall down. All day. Domino dancing. All day. Watch them all fall down. All day. Domino dancing.
At the cusp of the 1990s, there was certainly no shortage of interest in upbeat, ravey party music, and the so-called Manchester scene was in full swing. But the Pet Shop Boys' follow-up to Introspective would take their sound in a different direction. They went to Germany to work with Harold Faltermeyer, best known for his instrumental synth smash Axel F. There, surrounded by Faltermeyer's collection of analog synthesizers, they would create an album that was, well, kind of a downer. Behavior's opener, Being Boring, is a track whose reputation probably precedes it. It's one of the best-known Pet Shop Boys songs, and over the last 30 years, it's become emblematic of its era. Being Boring is a stark and pensive reflection on the tragedy of the young lives lost to the AIDS epidemic, and the uncanny strangeness of getting older while knowing a lot of others didn't have that luxury. But at the same time, there's something surprisingly jubilant and triumphant about the way that chorus rises up, almost like exultation at having survived, even though the verses feel more downbeat. Lyrically, the focus on having never been boring puts focus on having lived a vibrant life, more so than it does the silence of the crypt. Behavior might be a somber album, but it's not without a sense of hope or optimism. Just listen to the track The End of the World.
Floods of tears and doors slamming, stamping feet across the landing. Because of your obligation to stay home and fight, sitting down to a composition, test the limits of your inhibition. The phone hasn't rung by midnight.
While Being Boring deals with the very adult gravity of death, grief, and survivorship, The End of the World asks us to imagine the petty romantic squabblings of teenagers and their magnified sense of importance. While its title is a bit ambiguous, the song itself is quite clear. What's going on here is by no means the end of the world. Like I said, Behavior is far from all doom and gloom, though it has sort of gotten that reputation. While acclaim for Behavior is certainly as common among hardcore Pet Shop Boys fans as it is anyone else, I'm tempted to think that some of the praise it receives from relative outsiders is connected to this perception of it as the serious Pet Shop Boys album that deals with real issues instead of being packed with fun pop songs. While I like gloomy, serious music as much as anybody, and personally prefer it to the more lighthearted releases, there's no reason to predicate appreciation for the Pet Shop Boys on their being cerebral or high-minded. But that seems to be a common plague of music criticism, particularly of that rockist sort. The track How Can You Expect to Be Taken Seriously serves as its own sort of commentary on rock culture.
You live up on a stage and everyone's agrees. You're the brightest hope by far that anyone can see. So when you take the limelight, you can guarantee you're gaining fame and claiming credibility. Tell me, baby, are you gonna get high as a kite? Tell me, baby, are you gonna let it happen every night? How can you expect to be taken seriously?
In How Can You Expect to Be Taken Seriously, the titular question is posed to rock stars whose inflated egos make them think they have something meaningful to say about big issues like politics. The song's rougher soundscape stands out against dreamier tracks like Being Boring, and perhaps kicks it slightly closer to sounding like a rock song. While I can certainly get behind a song that mocks rock and roll self-righteousness, it does seem a bit ironic in the context of Behavior, an album that would see the Pet Shop Boys making a clear effort to tackle meaty, real-world issues. I suppose that any album released by artists who are already established in their career might be expected to include some consideration for the dilemmas that come with that territory. Another track that explores this same theme is My October Symphony.
It's something music. Will they cancel a parade? We marched each October. Now they say we were never even saved. We must be very brave. Shall I rewrite or revise my October symphony? Or as an indication, change the dedication from revolution to revelation?
While never released as a single, My October Symphony is a popular track nonetheless. It was inspired by the life of the great Russian composer Dmitri Shostakovich, and portrays the grave uncertainties presented to the artist by the collapse of communism, and with it the prevailing sense of mythology and moral values. Given the themes involved, many have interpreted it as a track that obliquely questions where famous queer artists like the Pet Shop Boys were going in a world that had been devastated by AIDS. While it's about a very different kind of musician, I certainly like to think that it's a track that rhymes with How Can You Expect to Be Taken Seriously, and that it also questions the relationship between artists and the values of the society around them. Behavior's cover art recalls that of the Pet Shop Boys' 1986 debut, Please, with a strong emphasis on empty, white space and a small design in the center. While the relationship of its four panels is ambiguous, it could be interpreted as a representation of death. As a face turns away, the human figures disappear, leaving the still, unchanged, inanimate objects behind. As children, we quickly learn that not being able to see something doesn't mean the thing is truly gone, but nevertheless, we sometimes have a tendency to ignore things we wish would go away. Perhaps the cover of Behavior is an allusion to the way world governments buried their heads in the sand, so to speak, regarding the AIDS crisis, hoping it would conveniently die down and vanish when it wasn't being observed. The title of Behavior is perhaps even more mysterious and up to interpretation than the cover. There's something very detached and clinical about that word and impersonal ambiance. I'm reminded of the seemingly unsympathetic narrators of several tracks, such as The End of the World and How Can You Expect to Be Taken Seriously, that seem to cast judgment on the actions of others without taking an interest in their emotional internality. They discuss behaviors as cut-and-dry phenomena and focus on the actions that people take. While neutrality can be cold and condemnatory, it can also be a welcome change when introduced to a subject traditionally treated with hostility. In that light, I'm tempted to think of the title as referring to homosexual behavior, contextualizing sexuality as less of a fixed identity and something that one intrinsically is, and more about an action, a decision, something that one does, a mentality that a lot of people find rather liberating. In introducing Behavior, I described it as an album that's often considered the Pet Shop Boys' best work. But their 1993 follow-up to it, Very, is also a strong contender for that title in the hearts of many of their biggest fans. Very has a lot more in common with Introspective than it does Behavior, going back to the rich, dense productions and upbeat, poppy love songs. The fact that the Pet Shop Boys managed to pull off two very different but both very acclaimed releases back-to-back speaks volumes about why people love them as much as they do. Whether you like them or not, they're undoubtedly one of those artists who some people can turn to in just about any mood or any season of life, and that's a powerful thing.
Ask me when. I'll say it started when I met you. And ever since then, I knew that the past couldn't last. For right now, I think I'm running a race I know I'm gonna win. And I wouldn't normally do this kind of thing. I wouldn't normally do this kind of thing.
My favorite track on Behavior is its lead single, So Hard. It's one of my all-time favorite Pet Shop Boys tracks and almost certainly my favorite of their singles. With its wryly bitter narrative of two-timing lovers and harsh, clattering analog synthesizer soundscape, So Hard is a pretty different feel to the rest of the album. Dark and ominous and without that wistful, sentimental aura. But that's exactly why I like it. The Pet Shop Boys were among the first artists to deliberately adopt analog synths for the subjective qualities of their sound, and this track employs them in a way that's reminiscent of what artists tend to do with them nowadays. It's punchy with that clunky, mechanistic analog quality to it. Not a typical Pet Shop Boys song, but a damn good one nonetheless. That's all I've got for today. Thanks for listening.
Always hoping you'll be faithful, but you're not, I suppose. We've both given up smoking.